Welcome back to Tanya on One Foot. Today, we're going to run through the second section of Tanya, which goes from chapter 18 through 25. In the first section of Tanya, from chapter 1 through 17, first the Alter Rebbe laid out the definitions: what's a tzaddik, what's a rasha, what's a benoni, what's a godly soul, what is an animal soul, what's holiness, what's the opposite of holiness, and so on. The conclusion was that the average person should strive to be a benoni on two levels. The first is that the benoni is one who is in full self-control of his thought, speech, and action. And this, the Alter Rebbe explained, everyone is capable of doing at any moment. At any moment, I can decide what I want to think, what I want to say, and what I want to do. The second part to being a benoni is his love of God. Now, in the first part of Tanya, until chapter 17, the method of gaining love and attachment to God and fear, any emotional connection to God, is through deep understanding of God's greatness, deep contemplation and consideration, to the point that it affects the heart. Or at least one comes to the conclusion, I ought to feel for God. Now, the problem with this method is two things. Number one, it requires the person to have the kind of mind and heart that's capable of studying God's greatness, understanding it, and contemplating it to the point of motivation. The second problem is that one cannot always just contemplate on the spot. Contemplation takes a certain preparation, one needs to study, it takes a certain amount of time, there are certain opportune times for it, and so on. Therefore comes the Alter Rebbe in the second part of Tanya, from chapter 18 through 25, and gives another method for serving God with the sense of emotional attachment, love and fear. And this is through invoking the natural, inborn, existential love every Jew already has to God. So because every Jew already has this attachment to God, it doesn't require any special mind or heart, and it's always available. So in order to provide a method to access this existential, natural love we have for God, the Alter Rebbe dedicates these chapters. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to actually start with recapping chapter 18, 19, and then 23, 24, 25, and then I'm going to fill in the gap and explain chapter 20, 21, and 22. In chapter 18 and 19, the Alter Rebbe explained what is the nature of this love. The nature of this love is not a desire that I want to get closer, right? That's the nature of love born out of understanding God. I understand God's amazing, and therefore I want to get closer. The nature of this existential love is just that. It's existential. It's an attachment that is super rational. It's a natural attachment that a Jew says, it cannot be any other way. I must be connected to my Judaism. I must be connected to my God. That's just the way it is. It's like this faith type thing. And this is the place from which Jew has the capacity to give up his life rather than detach from God. When a Jew is faced with the stark choice, bow down to the idol and detach yourself forever from God, or die, a Jew takes death. Because the Jew is super rationally, naturally, existentially attached to God, and it cannot be any other way. That's 18 and 19. Now, at the end of this section, in 23, 24, the Alter Rebbe explains that every mitzvah is an attachment to God, and every sin is a detachment from God. What's the essence of idol worship? The essence of idol worship is an entity which says, I am independent from God. And what's a sin? A sin says, well, God doesn't want me to do it, but I do it anyway. That's also a declaration of independence from God. And what's a mitzvah? A mitzvah is, I submit myself to the truth. This is what God wants, and this is what I do. And therefore, a sin is a detachment from God, and a mitzvah is a oneness, union, attachment to God. Therefore, says the Alter Rebbe in chapter 25, if I am willing to die rather than serve idols and detach myself from God, then certainly I should be willing to control my little desire for this silly little sin, which is going to detach me from God. And if I'm willing to die rather than detach myself from God, then certainly I should get off the couch, not be so lazy, and engage myself in a simple, easy mitzvah. And in this way, become one with God, attach myself to God. This is the essence of what the Alter Rebbe wants to bring us to in these chapters. To the point of understanding that a mitzvah is an attachment to God and a sin is a detachment from God, and therefore remind myself of the innate existential connection I have to God, and therefore it's not worth doing anything that will detach me from God, and it's worth giving every effort to attach myself to God. That's the essence of these chapters. And that's how one serves God with this existential, natural, super-rational love and attachment to God. Now in chapter 20 and 21 and 22, the Alter Rebbe needs to explain how is it that a sin is a detachment from God, and how is a sin an attachment to God. And to explain this, the Alter Rebbe first begins by explaining what's the relationship God has with this world at large. And here he explains it in 3 different stages. Number 1, all the energy that God invests in creating all the universe is nothing. It's just a couple of words he uttered. It does not diminish his energy. Number 2, those utterances, those words by which he created all of these universe never left him. It's all within him. Number 3, the fact that we see ourselves as independent is because God created a reality in which His truth is concealed, thus allowing us to feel a sense of independence. Now, because it's only from our perception, right? Because the truth is God is the only reality, God is everywhere, because all the creation that He made is all within Him, and it's only from our perception that we do not see His truth, because He designed that we should be that way. The question of life then becomes, to what degree am I honest, true, and submit myself to the truth that God is the only reality? Hence the mitzvah, surrender to God, acknowledging the truth that God is the only reality. Whereas sin, I detach myself from God and I declare myself, I do what I want, thus denying this truth that God is the only reality. Now this sums up this second section of Tanya, which is about getting a person to understand what it means to attach to God through a mitzvah, and it means to detach from God through a sin, and that way invoking the existential attachment I have to God, which will not allow me to do a sin and would motivate me to do mitzvah. Now the next section of Tanya, which goes from 26 through 34, here the Alter Rebbe deals with a question of getting rid of issues that will stop me from serving God in either the 2 methods. Either the method of the first section of Tanya, up to 17, where a person has to consider God's greatness and that way come through love, or using the second method of loving and attaching myself to God through my existential attachment. Before I begin either of these journeys, there are certain things I need to get out of the way. And they are depression and having a closed heart. In order to serve God properly, in any type of love, I need to be happy, I need to be light, I need to be open-hearted, I need to be willing, able. If I'm closed and I'm feeling the stress, I'm not going to come to a loving attachment to God. And therefore the Alter Rebbe is going to dedicate the next section, 26 through 34, to help us deal with things that might cause us to be sad or depressed or closed-hearted, and give us method and tools to develop joy, happiness, open-heartedness, and to feel ready and open to feel either of these 2 types of attachment to God. Looking forward to seeing you after we conclude the next section.